Hello, and welcome to this month's PMOPA webinar, focusing on a new PMOPA member benefit and resource, the Quick Reference Handbook. I'm Mike Nichols, and it's my pleasure to moderate this webinar this evening. Thank you very much for attending this webinar. The PMOPA Board of Directors and our committee volunteers have been incredibly active, and we're off to a great start in 2024, launching new programs that are aligned with PMOPA's values of safety, advocacy, and community. I hope you will make plans to join your fellow PMOPA members March 8th and 9th in Vero Beach, Florida, for the East Coast Regional event, which we're calling the Piper Homecoming. The event will kick off Friday afternoon with tours of the Piper factory, then a reception with Piper. On Saturday, we'll have a full day of educational content, including interactive presentations on the benefits of flight data monitoring, aviation taxes, nightmares and truisms, preventing stall spin accidents, traveling to the Bahamas, and more. Speaking of flight data monitoring, you hopefully saw today's email announcing the formal rollout of PMOPA's flight data monitoring program. This program will add significant value to our safety and training initiatives, and I strongly encourage you to sign up to participate in that program. And the final new safety resources I'd like to highlight this evening are the Quick Reference Handbooks for the Piper PA46 variants, which is the subject of tonight's webinar. Mark Spitzer, a member of PMOPA's Safety Committee, spent over 1,000 hours of volunteer time to create these QRHs for PMOPA members to use. Mark has been a member of the association since 2000. He has owned a Piper Meridian for the past 4 years and previously owned a Malibu for about 20 years. Mark has accumulated more than 2,500 hours flight experience in PA46 aircraft. He is the author of Understanding, Maintaining, and Flying the Piston PA46, Malibu, Mirage, Matrix, and M350, and the Meridian Pilot's Handbook, both published in 2022 and available for sale on Amazon. This evening, Mark will walk through what the QRH is, how to use a QRH, and answer questions you have with regard to them. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please type them into the Q&A portal, which you can find and click on in the bottom center of your screen. After his presentation, we'll walk through your questions and he'll reply to each one of those. Thank you again for attending. And Mark, thank you very much for your excellent work, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mike. Let me share my screen and show some charts. And let's see if this works. We should have a slideshow. How's that? You see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So this webinar is really broken down into 3 parts. So first, I'm going to present a few charts on what the Quick Reference Handbooks really are and what I was thinking when I put it together, what that's all about, and some of the mechanics of it. And then we'll do a deep dive into any of the handbooks people want. I'll start maybe with the Meridian G1000 version, and we can switch to any of the other handbooks and look at any of the procedures that are in the handbooks. And then the third part is reserved for discussion, questions, suggestions for improvements. And let me begin with a quick initial disclaimer that these Quick Reference Handbooks are not an approved document from the FAA. They're not approved by Piper. And I think, what that means is that each person who uses it has to approve of it, him or herself. And but for Part 91, I think this is okay. But I wanted to get that out there. So let's talk about what a QRH is. What I was thinking when I put this together is that I wanted it to be information that you can use in an abnormal situation or an emergency that's helpful, more helpful than what you could get from the POH. And part of that is providing more information that then is in the POH, or that is easy to find in the POH, and also providing it in a mechanical way that's where it's easy to find the information that you need. And if you have an abnormal situation or an emergency, you're going to want to get to the information quickly. So when I first started building this, I thought it would be paper, but then someone I think it was Dave McVinney on the safety committee, suggested that it should be electronic because there could be hyperlinks and you could find information very fast. So we changed it over to an electronic form. It runs on an iPad or an Android device. And if you're running ForeFlight, you can run it as a document in ForeFlight. That's what I'm showing on this picture over on the right. That's an iPad with one of the quick reference handbooks brought up in the documents section of ForeFlight. And that works really well. Or you could just view it as a PDF on any of these devices and use mechanical features that are built into the various PDF readers. There are also hyperlinks and other things built into the handbook that I'll show you later. I think that it's what we have here is a set of emergency checklists, or sometimes I would call them do lists, because really we just have to follow them and do the procedure. And also notes that can be helpful if you have to stop and think about, well, what's really going on here. The procedures are followed by a page or two of notes that you can scan through pretty quickly. I'll show you all of this later. We'll dive in. Pardon me. Every part of as many parts as I could of these procedures, I put in POH references, and I'll show you those when we get into them. There are 12 specific POHs so far, and probably more to come. So I think some of this might be, I've already stated that with an electronic form, we can put a lot more information in than would be really feasible to put in section 3 of the POH. We could cross-link it or cross-reference it with hyperlinks, so you can jump around pretty fast. We have ability to branch, which means, like, if we get to a decision point and if the oil pressure is 100 psi, then you do this. If it's 80, then you do that. It's easy to branch, and then if it's an emergency descent is called for, you can quickly branch off to that. It's much easier than if you had a paper book and you were trying to look through the POH thinking, okay, now the thing says to do an emergency descent. Okay, where's that? I have to find that. You're going to see this is really easy to use. Also, it's redundant in a good way. There's some of the same information appears in multiple places. Since we don't really have to worry about how many pages of information we have in this thing, it's possible to put the same information in a lot of different places, so you don't have to look for it. So that if you're doing a procedure and you need a certain information, it's right there for you. You don't have to go hunt for it. And I think also in an emergency, it's a tool that helps you remain calm. It's sort of like having your instructor there. You look up a procedure and it says, okay, this is what you do. These are the factors to consider. And I think that it's actually a better device than just looking at a piece of paper in the POH. You'll see. You'll be able to make a judgment on that in a couple minutes. So these are the versions that we have. You might wonder, well, why do we have so many? Because really the Mirage and the Matrix, the M350, they're all basically the same. Why are there so many versions? Well, it turns out that if you're trying to chase down an enunciator, you want to have a version of the QRH that has your enunciators that are in your model, and they're different. They've evolved as the airplane avionics have become more sophisticated. There are more sensors, there are more enunciators. In the case of the G1000s, I don't know how many CAS messages, a lot more than the enunciators in the original Malibu, which was 8 or maybe it was 10 or 12 at the most. So basically we have 12 versions to try to cover all of the angles. Now these are for versions as equipped from Piper. It doesn't cover if you got a new panel with a G500 and somebody else's autopilot and a lot of things that didn't come with the airplane. I wasn't able to cover all of those variations. So these are the these cover what you got from Piper. And also, apologies to JetProp owners. I don't have one for JetProp. One may be coming for the JetProp. There are some JetProp owners forming a committee to look into this. But I felt like I didn't know enough about the JetProp in order to be able to put a good quick reference handbook together for the JetProp. And maybe someday there will be an M700 as well. But we can't do that until we have a approved POH. Okay, how do you get this off of the website? This is the main PMOPA website page that you get to when you log in. And what you do is you go to the safety tab and you pull that down, and right under there is the quick reference handbooks. Click on that and you get to the 12 books. This is only showing 3, but there are actually lots of rows below that. And just pick the one you want, download it, and add it to your PDF library. Okay, so when I began this project, I started with the enunciators because they indicate unusual or emergency conditions. And I created tables, and they're very much like the tables in the POH where they list all the enunciators and what they mean. And what this allows you to do, if you go to these tables and look up the enunciator that's lit up, you'll get an interpretation of what that means. And it's important to do that because the enunciator or the CAS message is kind of limited in what it can say. So it doesn't always mean exactly what it says. For example, if you're in one of the turbines and you get an engine fire enunciation, it doesn't mean you have exactly that you have an engine fire. What it means is you have a high temperature in the engine compartment. It might be a fire, it might not be a fire. Or if you get a feather indication, that may mean it's feathered, the prop is feathered, but probably doesn't exactly mean that. And of course, gear unsafe, it might not really be unsafe. You might have sagging gear. So anyway, the point is, you go in the table and you look at what that looks like, or what the interpretation is. And I think I mentioned this before, but I'm going to give you an example of it. When you go to the page that explains what that enunciator means, the procedure that's provided is followed by a section of notes that are good tips and things like, okay, prop heat draws this many amps, or other things that you might want to know. And I'll show you some when we do a deep dive into some of these. Let's look at what that table of enunciators looks like. This is the page, one of the pages for the M600. So you have over here the CAS messages in the case of in the M600 on the left, and then what it means. So okay, if you get the alternator fail message, and that's obvious, but if you get something that's, let's say, not obvious, well, I mentioned the engine fire one, over temperature condition. Now, the blue text, anything that's in blue is a hyperlink. So if you saw this engine fire enunciation and you wanted to go to the procedure for engine fire, you just click on that or touch it on your iPad, and you will go right to that page. And I'll show you how that works later. Also, at the top and the bottom of every page is a button, jump to the table of contents. Table of contents will take you anywhere in these documents. It's organized in sections, which we'll look at later. And so navigation around the QRH is meant to be easy, fast, and you can also use the navigation tools that ForeFlight or your PDF viewer on your Android device, whatever. You can use those tools as well. One thing I wanted to mention while we're on this is that the colors that I've used here are not always the same colors as in the on the panel. And the reason is that a lot of the CAS systems, I think mine, these messages are red on a black background. But when I tried red on a black background, it just wasn't really readable on, with all of this white around it, it didn't work. So I changed it to colors that work better, that were as close to authentic as I could get. Also, on some of the older models, I was unable to figure out what the colors are that are actually on the annunciators. So some of those are just black and white because I didn't know what the color is. Okay. Also, that there are abnormal conditions that are not enunciated that are in the QRHs. Some examples like electrical fire, you don't have an enunciator that says electrical fire. Or if you have a power rollback, there's no enunciator that says that. Prop is vibrating. And these are just 3 examples. There are lots of conditions that you could run into that are in the QRH that don't have enunciator. So you would just look in the table of contents and under the right section, it's organized, like engine conditions, environmental conditions, and so forth. You'll see, because we're gonna dive into that. Another thing that's in the QRH are something that I call tricks of the trade. These are things that people in the community know, but they're not necessarily in the POH. So you might have a condition where something's happening, you look in the POH, it gives you an emergency procedure, but it doesn't tell you everything that you really would like to know. And I'm going to give you an example of one of those. One is a step that we can use in a rapid depressurization, or maybe not rapid, a depressurization event. This is a page out of the QRH for the Mirage, the G1000 Mirage. You feel the cabin is depressurizing. You get a message that says cabin altitude 10,000. It means that the cabin has climbed above 10,000 feet. And these steps, 1 through 5, are the same steps as in the POH. It's exactly the same. Step 6, where I put if time permits, this is not in the POH, but this is pretty well known to most people. You may forget this when you have a pressurization event. So when you look it up, you'll see there's a step 6 here that is pull the pressure dump circuit breaker, because the reason being that sometimes you have a squat switch failure and the cabin, the logic of the airplane thinks the plane's on the ground and it dumps the cabin. And all you have to do to restore pressurization is pull that circuit breaker. Now that you get that in training, maybe you forgot it, but it's not in the POH. And I'll show you. Here's the POH. This is the checklist for emergency, pressurization, loss of pressurization. It's not there. And this is the expanded explanation. It's actually this paragraph, the second paragraph. And it doesn't say, oh, by the way, pull that circuit breaker. Okay, so checklist versus do lists. I think in general, the quick reference handbooks provide do lists. I mean, really, you probably want to do the steps in the order written. And it does require judgment. You may not want to do all of them every time. Like, for example, one of the judgment issues is, do you want to put on the oxygen mask or not? Well, it's altitude dependent. It depends how fast the cabin's climbing. And it's not the only thing. There are lots of things where pilot judgment is required, but really the steps probably should be done in the order. Whereas in a checklist, you're just checking to make sure you've done all the things, like your pre-takeoff checklist. You want to make sure, you have the right things turned on. Or your pre-landing checklist, where you check the gears down and you check the flaps, or all that stuff. The order is not that important, but in this case, the order is more important. So I call them do lists. Now, the steps in these lists are numbered, but it's not because you have to do every single action. You can use your judgment and skip some. The reason the steps are numbered is so that we can jump from step to step. So you may get to a branch point that says, if the ITT is above 770 degrees, then do step 12. Let me give you an example of that. If you're flying a Matrix or a Mirage, this is the Matrix emergency gear extension thing. And you had a power failure, and you're operating off the battery, and in that case, in the Mirage or the Matrix, you're probably using the ground clearance bus because you're just talking, you're using some of your, your emergency gyros, or anyway, you don't have the power to put the landing gear down. You don't want to run the hydraulic pump. So in this case, it says, if only on the ground clearance bus, jump directly to step 8. In other words, skip all of this stuff. You're not going to turn the battery master back on and do all of this stuff. Just jump to 8 and execute from there on. Another thing I want to show you on here is that wherever I could do this, I put in the circuit breaker location. So if you have an instruction that says reset a circuit breaker, the location is given, and the POH does this too. At least the current POHs, most of the modern POHs for the A46 give you the circuit breaker location, and I think that's handy because when you are under stress, things are going wrong. You don't want to have to put your head down and kind of look for a circuit breaker based on the labels. This is much better. Now, of course, I have to say that if you've had your panel modified and rewired and the circuit breakers have been moved around, you'll have to make some notes about where the circuit breakers are, because these won't be correct. But by and large, they're correct. This is the way the factory did it, at least in the POHs that I have for each of the models. Okay, this is the full procedure for the emergency gear extension. We just looked at this jump to step 8. So you have all of these things. I think everybody here tonight who's watching this knows what this procedure is or has gone through it in training. I wanted to show you the full procedure because the notes section gives you some important things. And like this number 2 here, this note, that it may require 25 pounds of force to operate the valve. That is in the Matrix. The Malibu is a little different. I think it's the Parker Hannifin and the Frisbee systems. There's a lot of force required to pull that knob. And I didn't know this. I was doing training with an instructor who a pretty well-known instructor, and we couldn't pull that handle, and I was afraid to pull it too hard and break it. But I didn't really realize till I researched this that actually it says in the POH that you might need 25 pounds of force. Anyway, this is the kind of tip that is in the notes section. It is another tip here about why you need to be at 90 knots before you try this procedure. And there are other tips here. If you have this enunciation, then you do that. And so, when you're faced with this, pardon me, when you're faced with this, you can look through the notes and see if there's any information that's useful to you. Now, some of the terminology that's used in the QRHs, I want to just mention because I think this is pretty important. If the procedure says land immediately, that means get on the ground the fastest way you can. If you're on fire, you have an engine fire, you've confirmed it, it, the procedure is going to say land immediately. And that means don't waste any time, just get it done. Land as soon as possible is also an emergency, but it means get to the nearest airport without any delay. Get on the ground, but don't put it in a field if if you can get to the airport. When a procedure says execute or use, it's like execute a descent at maximum vertical rate. It means you probably should do that. Of course, you use your own judgment when you're following these procedures, but execute or use means you probably ought to jump to this procedure and use it. As opposed to review or consider, that means think it over. There's a link to the procedure. If you want to review it, see what it says, That's not as strong as execute or use. So these are really in order of strength. This do this right away. Think about it down here on review and consider. Okay, so why don't we do a deep dive into one of the QRHs? I want to show you. We'll start with the Meridian G1000, and I'm going to have to go out of presentation mode to do this. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment, and then we'll share it again in a second. So let me go out of the presentation and into the procedure here, and stand by while I set this up for you. Okay. Okay, can you see that page that says NG overspeed? Is that showing?
Yes, it is, Mark.
Okay, so let me go to right to the beginning. So this is a G1000 Meridian QRH, and it's also the G1000 NXI. They're alike enough so that I could put them in the same quick reference handbook. If you go to the table of contents, you can see that it's organized by, well, in groups. So if you have a fire, go to the fire section and pick one of these procedures. If you have engine trouble, you can pick something that is closest to what you've got. And so all of these groupings, they are all kind of sensibly grouped together so that you don't have to hunt around a lot. And if you decided, okay, I really want to, I've got an engine fire and I got to go right to that, just click on this. I wasn't able to make the table of contents hyperlink purple. It's just a Word forces me to have it blue. So this is the only case where the links are actually in blue. But if you click on those, you go right to the procedure. And I'm going to come back to this procedure. I just wanted to show you how that would work. You also can go right back to the table of contents. Let's say, oh, I didn't want the engine fire and flight procedure. I wanted the something else. So then just go back to the table of contents. So that's your table of contents. That's not the only way to navigate. Some definitions here. Here's that chart that we were looking at. We looked at the M600. This is the G1000. Let's say your door is ajar and you want to know what to do about that. Well, you click on that, it goes right to the door ajar. I don't have a back button. There might be part of the browser, I don't know. So if we want to go back, we have to go back to the table of contents and then go back to where we were. So let's say we didn't want the door ajar thing. We would go back to where we were, either scan there or use the table of contents to get there. Anyway, so these are the explanations of what this mean, what these CAS messages in the case of the G1000 mean. And they go on for pages because they're lots of them. They're in alphabetical order. So I tried to make it easy to find. There are also gauge warnings that you get on the actual instruments that are listed here. These are the yellow ones, or amber ones, which are not as critical as the red. So there's pages of those. These are advisory. These actually are white on black, which doesn't show very well, on here. So I use black on white. And where there's something to jump to, there's a hyperlink. Sometimes there isn't. Like, if you have an indication that the fuel pump is on, well, that's just informational. There's no QRH page on that. Okay. or more enunciators or CAS messages. These I call them enunciations because they are right on the PFD in a particular position. Okay. Now, if you keep going, you get to an emergency airspeed page where, well, let's say you need to go to maneuvering speed and you know what your weight is, you can look it up, or your best glide speed. And also, we also have charts where you can look it up more exactly. So emergency airspeed graphs. Now I'm wondering, let's see, what should we look at? Because now we can look at some of these procedures. Let's look at fire and flight, because this is a neat one. And this is one where you really have to know what you're doing and be careful about it. If you get a CAS message that says engine fire, as I was saying before, it really only means that the temperature is abnormal or it's hot in the engine compartment. And for example, you could have a P3 leak that's blowing on the fire detection loop and set off the engine fire alarm. And so you don't want to just react to and say, oh, I've got an engine fire, I better shut the engine down. So what the QRH does is it tells you right up front, you got to confirm whether there's a fire or not before you take action. And I think the POH says that, but it doesn't tell you how to confirm it. And in this QRH, there's some tips for how to confirm it. So first, you're going to reduce the power because you might have an engine fire, or you might have a P3 leak, but reducing the engine power is the first step. And you might consider using oxygen if you need to. You have to think that over. Now, confirming the fire. Okay, there's a flow chart on that, on how to do it. But basically, you're going to look for flames or smoke. Turn the plane, look behind you. Are you trailing smoke? If you don't see any signs of fire, then you could suspect that you have some other condition that's set off the fire detection loop. But if you have it, and it says this in red letters because this is important, if you have a engine fire, you have to shut the engine down. You can't fly with, a fuel-fed fire up front because, it's very bad. So you gotta cut off the fuel. And so these are the steps. You can look through that and see what it says. When you get to step 19, it says declare an emergency. And it doesn't say that up here because you got stuff to do before you declare the emergency. You have more important things to worry about. But eventually it'll tell you to declare an emergency. And then if you look at look down here, it gives you some choices. If you put the fire out because you're diving the airplane and the fire is out and the fuel is out, and then you can switch over to the emergency descent and forced landing procedure, which is like a max range glide. If the fire is not known to be out, you want to get on the ground right away. So you would go to this emergency descent maximum vertical rate procedure. Okay, and then there's some helpful tips about this. If you had any doubt about whether a engine fire was a dire emergency, it's going to tell you in the notes. Yeah, this is the real thing. Get on the ground, save lives, forget the airplane. Okay. Let's see if I can find that flow chart. Oh, here's another thing in the notes that you might want to have, which is your maneuvering speed, because you want to get down fast, but if it's very turbulent, you may want to come down at maneuvering speed. That's a judgment you have to make. Here's the flow chart for how you might work your way through the suspicion of an engine fire. And then the next procedure in here is electrical fire, what you do about that. I don't know if that's worth going through. Let's look at some other things. Let's go back to the table of contents and pick something else to look at besides engine trouble. Let's say you got a fuel temperature CAS message. Would look like that, white on black. And so the QRH gives you some guidance on what to do. If you're on the ground, it tells you, your temperature limits for starting the engine. And if it's in flight, it gives you advice on what to do. Basically, if it's too cold, you have to descend to warmer air. So that's pretty straightforward. Let's see if we look at something that's a little bit less straightforward. How about, well, electrical problems are really the most complicated ones to try to figure out. Let's look at what about a generator failure? Okay, so you would get the CAS message that says generator fail. And that may be, you may have a volts message. You can work your way through the reset process. This is how you would reset your generator. Follow these steps. And then here's a interesting tip in the notes, which it's not in the POH, but I thought of this and stuck it in there. If you have a generator failure, you can proceed with the alternator, right? But you might also have a starter motor failure. So if you just land at the little airport that's right below you that has no services or anything, you may not be able to start the plane. You'll be stuck there for a while. So the tip here is pick an airport with services. It's not a huge emergency if you're running on the alternator. Let's look at one of the pistons now. Let me unshare my screen and pick a different QRH, and we'll take a brief look at that and then open it up for questions. And if people want to look at a particular procedure and a particular airplane, we can do that. So let me stop my share and let's see, which one shall we look at? Why don't we look at the Avidyne Mirage? And re-share that. Screen share. So our table of contents is going to look similar, but what we do, the details will be completely different. So let's take a look at what we would do if we had a dual vacuum system failure in the Mirage, and this is the Avidyne equipped one. So you'll get annunciations on the annunciator panel. Now you'll have VAC 1 in op, VAC 2 in op, and then this will provide some steps and what you should do. But I think what's interesting here is in the notes, you'll have some information about what things are not available when you don't have working vacuum pumps, if you've lost both of them. So you can read through this when you download it, if this is your airplane, and you'll get some tips. Let's see what else we can look at on the pistons. Why don't we look at the emergency descent at maximum vertical rate? That's not actually that different than any of the airplanes, but this is for the Mirage. There's a warning right up front that if you follow this procedure, you're going to have a rapid loss of pressurization, because as you know, if you pull the throttle back, your turbochargers are not going to be able to keep the cabin pressurized. So there's some information about whether you should use oxygen masks. You have to think about that, but it kind of reminds you to do that. And then this is out of the POH. Pull the throttle back to 23 inches until you're below flight level 230 and then idle. And I'm not going to walk you through all of this stuff, except to just point out that there's information here about what speed you might want to use. Now, if you're on fire and you need to get on the ground, maybe you don't care whether the air is rough or not, but if you're descending because you lost pressurization and you want to get to breathable air, okay, here are air speeds to use. In smooth air, this is the range. And then depending on your weight, you want to come down at maneuvering speed if it's very rough air. And there's other tips for how to do that. There's also a maneuvering speed chart in the notes section. So you don't have to go back. Let me back up and say, this is what I meant about information being redundant. You don't want to always have to go back to the section of the QRH that has the emergency speeds. Why not just put them in with the notes for the procedure? So that's what I did. This is your maneuvering speed chart for the emergency descent. And if you were looking at the descent for maximum glide, which I think is, this one, forced landing, the chart here is going to be your best glide speed versus gross weight. Now, this procedure for the forced landing one is the one where it's kind of like having your instructors sitting next to you, kind of walking you through what you're going to do. Because, okay, your engine can't be restarted, because we skipped the restart section here because it didn't restart. And now what are we doing? We're proceeding to the field. I guess I'm doing this a little bit out of order, but somewhere up here it says to set your heading bug for the field right here and start gliding toward it. Consider the restart. But here's the important part that I wanted to get to. This is a reminder about how to do a dead stick landing. You want to put the plane on the downwind to beam the numbers at about 1,500 feet above ground. And stay close to the field. You're going to think you're too high. This is what your instructor will tell you if you're doing these, in your recurrent training. You're going to look like you're too high. But keep in mind, if you're too low, you can't fix it. Too high, you can fix too high. So there's a procedure of things that you want to do. And then, of course, when you're on final, committed to land on final, the field is made, put your gear down, use flaps as required, slip as required, slow down, and you will make it. More notes, a little bit more information about spiraling down over the field. Okay, partial power loss in flight, what to do about that. It's all in here. And I think it'll be useful. Now, what I'd like to do is I'm going to stop sharing my screen and go back to the presentation. Let's see, I got to share my screen again, I guess. Share the screen. Okay, let's go back to where we were. We did the deep dive. Okay, discussions and questions. I want to, before we jump into the discussion and questions, I've got a few more disclaimers that I feel like I ought to present. The QRH is going to be helpful. I guarantee you it's going to be helpful, but it may not be appropriate for every situation. You have to use your judgment. And along those lines, the QRH can't, and the POH for that matter, can't anticipate every emergency that could occur. For example, the QRH doesn't tell you what to do if you're covered with ice. It's just so situational that you can't develop a procedure for that. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Now, another thing, point 3 here. When I was putting this together, sometimes I found that the POH explained something really well. And I just used it. And, since I'm not the president of Harvard or MIT, I don't have to be worried about being fired for plagiarism. So I just expropriated that language. I don't claim authorship of these QRHs, but I just wanted to say I shamelessly did that because I thought pilots deserve to have the instructions or the information provided in the best way. And if the POH was the best way, so be it. That's what got into QRH. Another thing that disclaimer is that over the years, panels change, right? So switches move around, circuit breakers end up in different places. There are going to be differences if your plane has been modified. There are going to be differences between the QRH and your plane. And all I can recommend for that is that you make a note of what those differences are and put it on a little card in the pocket so that if you ever have to refer to it, you've got it. Now, finally, on this page, there are errors. There are broken links. It's just impossible to find every single typo, every single hyperlink that doesn't work. And there may be some things that I got wrong because I don't fly the Matrix, or I've only flown the Malibu and a Meridian. So maybe I got something wrong on the M600. Let us know, let Mike know if you find a mistake, it will get fixed. And then finally, before we open it up, on future revisions, there will be future revisions. I'm fairly sure about that. Currently, we're on 1.1 because after we did version 1, I found some of the broken links and I fixed them, and that became version 1.1. Well, I have a question for the group. Is there other useful information that should be in a QRH? It doesn't have to all be about emergencies and abnormal conditions, although that's primarily what we're shooting for here. We could have other things in there. So if you think that there's something that it should have, let us know, and it will be considered. Another thing is that I'm wondering if we missed any important branch points. In other words, places in the logical flow of a procedure where we should have considered something and had it and branched to some other conditional set of instructions. We might have missed something there. So let us know about that. I mean, what we have here is mostly what is in the POH, but we want to have more than what's in the POH. And if we miss something, let us know. The other, along those lines also are tricks of the trade. I mentioned the idea of pulling the circuit breaker to stop the squat switch from dumping the cabin. And there are other things. I only know the ones for the planes that I fly, the Meridian these days. But I'm sure there are some tricks of the trade that you need if you're flying the Avidyne Mirage or you're flying your original Malibu. I think I got most of the original Malibu ones, but I might have missed some. So those should be in there, because when we're facing one of these abnormal situations, you want to have that information in the notes. And finally, comments are always welcome on these. We do want them to be as useful, as complete as they can be, and as accurate as they can be. So I think I'll stop here and stop my screen sharing and turn it back over to Mike for questions and discussion.
Mark, thank you. That was absolutely fantastic. And the one thing that I would add from what you said is that, yes, there likely will be some broken links still in them. Please test it on the ground. Ask everybody who downloads the QRHs, puts them on your iPad or whatever device you're using. Test it on the ground when you're sitting in your living room or your office. The time to find the broken link is then, not when you're at 22,000 feet and you have an abnormality or emergency and find that there's a broken link at that point. So please do take the time to test it on the ground and let us know if there are any that you find. So Mark, the first thing that came in is a comment, and the member says, "This handbook is incredible. It must have taken an enormous amount of effort to put together, and we all benefit from this and appreciate your incredible contribution to the safety of flying our PA-46s. Thank you," with a multitude of exclamation points behind it. And I couldn't have said it better myself. I think we all feel the same way, and we owe you a debt of gratitude for that.
I really appreciate that. It feels like I should use the old joke, thanks, Mom. But, no, I appreciate it. Thank you.
And then this came in before you even asked for additional items that should be considered. The member said, "Do you have normal checklists for our airplanes as well? For instance, start, takeoff, landing, shutdown, etc."
I haven't put together checklists for all of these models. I have my own checklist for the G1000 Meridian, which I'm happy to share. I have shared with other people. That could be something that we do, but I kind of favor the pilot making his own checklist. I think that is I know some people think you shouldn't make your own checklist, but I believe people should make their own checklists, and I'm happy to share what I've got on that.
Great, thank you. Next question is, I never see anything about opening the cabin door or emergency door before an emergency water or off-field landing. What's your take on that?
If I understand the question right, is how to open the emergency door, which is on the right side, the co-pilot side of the airplane. That probably should be in the QRH. That I don't think it's that complicated. The instructions are on the door, but let me make a note of that. Opening the emergency door. I think that's probably worth a section.
Great. And I think there might also, if I'm understanding the question correctly, might also be a question in there with regard to the timing. I think the wording says opening the cabin door or emergency door before an emergency water or off-field landing. So the timing of when you open the door perhaps is implied there as well.
Oh, in other words, if you're still in the air, would you open that door? I would not. But I'd have to think about whether there would ever be I mean, you could open the main door if you want to open a door while you're still in the air, but I've never heard of anybody opening the door intentionally in the air, except for the guy that jumped out of the plane with a parachute. That's the only case. The story about Mike, I don't know if you know this, there was a guy, a crook, I guess, who intentionally dumped his Meridian. He made it look like a crash by jumping out in flight with a parachute. Anyway, that's the only case I know of. I don't know that it's wise to open the doors while you're in flight. I don't think so.
Another person commented, yes, exclamation point, standard checklists, exclamation point. So I think they like the idea of having the standard checklists included in this.
Well, let's take that up with the safety committee. I think we could do that. There is a checklist in the POH, but I find that my checklist is a little bit more elaborate than what you get in the POH. So yeah, I'll make a note of that.
Perfect, thank you. Another attendee commented, huge thanks to Mark for being organized enough and concerned enough about fellow PA-46 pilots to put in all the time and effort to put this together with exclamation points. So
thank you.
Another vote of appreciation. And then somebody said, don't open the door before water impact. That's a little bit of debate or discussion back and forth with that. Somebody says, likelihood of inverted means water enters cabin. Cabin is airtight, it will float. And then and back to the checklist, says, please show us your normal checklist. I've made my own and I would love to be able to compare mine to yours. My airplane is a G1000 M350. Perhaps you could share it with me privately and I can share you with that member's name and contact information afterwards.
And my contact information's on the website, so anybody can get in touch with me. My email's on there.
Great.
So I'm happy to share what I've got. I don't have an M350 checklist, but I might have a Malibu checklist, but it would have to be modified.
Great. And then continuing with the discussion about when to open the door, somebody said, I was trained in emergency egress at an airline, and you don't open up until you've landed, just as Sully did. Everything after landing on the Hudson was opened, not beforehand.
Yeah, that's my intuitive answer earlier was you don't open the doors in flight. There's no reason unless you're jumping out with a parachute.
Yeah.
Don't open it.
Another person commented saying the same thing. Been through Navy deep water environment training multiple times. Navy standard is don't open doors ahead of time. Next comment is huge. Thanks to Mark with multiple exclamation points. So this is great. Somebody else said, I think that the question about doors was if or when to unlatch the doors or doors before impact to avoid the door being inoperable and blocking egress. And then I was informed that this is great. My background is backwards. The door is on the wrong side. I think it's just an inversion of the way the photo is uploaded. And
Yeah.
somebody else is going to provide an M350 checklist. And then somebody said that the thought of opening the door before landing is not to get stuck in a bent airframe where doors won't open, is common recommendation that this person hears for plane with normal doors. And yes, a big thanks to Mark for creating this.
So I do have a comment on the doors, and I'm not an expert on this particular subject, but I know, like, if you're talking a Cherokee and you're doing emergency landing, you pop the door open because you don't want it to be jammed when you hit the ground. But the PA-46s in general are, because they're pressurized, they're very strong, and I think that the chances of both doors, the emergency door and the regular cabin door, being jammed are pretty small. I don't think it's something I would worry about.
Okay. Somebody comments, this is a fantastic way to make our fleet safer. Thank you. Would it be helpful to include a procedure for water ditching?
Yeah. I think, yeah, probably it would. You know, there's somewhere in the emergency landing section, I copied something out of the POH that says if you're ditching, then leave the gear up. That's the only advice. But ditching checklist is probably, or a procedure is probably a good idea. Let's add that.
Excellent. And the person who asked the question about opening doors says, sorry to open Pandora's box. Great stuff. But I think it was a really good discussion.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the end of the questions that have come in so far. But Mark, as you indicated, your email address is on the PMOPA website under the member directory. So if anybody thinks of anything, feel free to reach out to Mark, or if you can't find it, reach out to me, and I'd be happy to convey it to Mark. Thank you all for attending tonight's webinar on the new PMOPA member resource and the quick reference handbooks. And Mark, thank you for putting this presentation together and all of the incredible work you did to develop the QRHs for us. With that, we'll say good night.
Good night.